We're taught history in school because many people feel it's important to learn about significant events and people that shape the world as we know it today. These facts also help us to prepare for future events, as we learn from mistakes that have been made by others. But there are some historical mysteries that we're unable to explain, as they seem to defy all logic and understanding of what we know about our planet. Some of these mysteries are eventually solved, but there are some events and discoveries that may never be explained. Number 5. In 1944, 1 year before the end of World War II, German soldiers started arriving in Budapest, Hungary. Due to the country's alliance with Germany, they were welcomed into the city with open arms. But this would turn out to be a massive mistake. As Adolf Hitler's paranoia worsened, he started to become suspicious of Hungary's deputy regent, Nicholas Horthy, and soon the country was occupied by the Germans. And so the Jewish community was treated in the same way as those across Europe, as close to 44,000 Jews were displaced through deportation, often to the infamous Auschwitz camp and other similar camps. Soon, only around 200,000 Jewish people were left in Budapest, but the German forces had plans in place to have them removed as well, and the Hungarian authorities were in agreement with that goal. By July of that year, things looked grim, as the only Jewish people left were located in Budapest. But Swedish authorities decided to do something about the horrific situation, and they began supplying Hungarian Jews with travel documents that allowed them safe passage into Sweden. Added to this, they also sent 31-year-old Swede, Raoul Wallenberg, among others, to save as many lives as possible, and as soon as he arrived, he learned that the Jewish people were having difficulty persuading German soldiers to accept the documentation, and he redesigned the passports so that they would look more formal. To do this, he added elements of his home country, Sweden, to the documents, including the colors of the flag and official stamps. Hungarian authorities agreed that Wallenberg would be allowed to issue 5,000 of these passports, which were known as Schutz passes, but by October of that year, he would need many more than that. The far-right Hungarian party, known as the Arrow Cross, had taken over. Jewish people were subjected to the very treatment that the Schutz passes were supposed to prevent, and Wallenberg knew that he had to step up his operations. He occupied several buildings in the city that were kept protected by Swedish forces, and he started issuing passes as they were needed, far exceeding the number of passes that were agreed upon. More than 15,000 Jewish people would find shelter in these buildings, around 300 of which aided Wallenberg by working in a soup kitchen that had been set up, and by helping to create the passes that their fellow Jews so desperately needed. His efforts would take a hit in October, when Adolf Eichmann arrived in Budapest and declared that Wallenberg's passes would no longer guarantee safety for Jewish people. Wallenberg and those who supported him launched a protest that would see the documents reinstated, but despite this, the passes weren't always acknowledged by German soldiers. Eichmann then hatched another diabolical plan. He ordered thousands of people to be marched to the border of Austria, where the worst possible fate awaited them. In an effort to counter this operation, Wallenberg organized for the necessary food and medicine to be brought to the march, while he and other neutrals accompanied them in vehicles. He remained dogged in his goal, even when threatened by German soldiers, and he managed to save many more lives along the way by claiming that they were under his protection. He made it his mission to save as many innocent lives as he could, since he felt that he would never be able to live with himself if he ever gave up. But he would suffer another setback in January of the following year, when Soviet forces arrived in Budapest. On the 17th of January, he was arrested when he attempted to report to General Malinovsky when they became convinced that he was guilty of espionage. While being taken away, Wallenberg became suspicious, stating he wasn't sure whether he was being treated as a guest or a prisoner. But it would turn out to be the latter, as he then mysteriously disappeared. At first, when inquiries were made about his whereabouts, the Soviets claimed that they'd never heard of anyone by the name of Wallenberg. But when it became apparent that he'd had interactions with many people in various prisons during that time, they recanted that statement in 1956, instead claiming that Wallenberg had passed away following a heart attack in a Russian prison in 1947. But this did little to ease the minds of those who were still looking for him. Their skepticism was only bolstered when some of Wallenberg's possessions, including his passport and cigarette case, were found in the KGB's headquarters basement in Moscow. His belongings were returned to his family in Sweden, after which a group was created to look into Wallenberg's disappearance. By the year 2000, they speculated that Wallenberg had most likely passed away as reported, but they were unable to find any details surrounding the event. But in 2009, another investigation into the case was underway when a letter was sent from the Federal Security Service in Russia to two researchers who were trying to find the truth behind Wallenberg's disappearance. The letter stated that there was a good chance that Wallenberg became prisoner number 7 after his arrest, and that records had been found that indicated he was still alive on the 23rd of July, nearly a week after he was said to have passed away. Adding even more intrigue to the case were reports from fellow prisoners, a prison cleaner, and several diplomats who were taken prisoner, who stated that they had seen Wallenberg long after he was reported to have had a heart attack. It's generally accepted that Wallenberg did indeed pass away in 1947, for the sole reason that there isn't enough solid evidence that he was ever alive after that date. But many people believe that he didn't have a heart attack, but he was executed by the Soviets, who grew ever more suspicious that he was a spy. But the fact remains that there wasn't any proof of this either, as Wallenberg had been working to save lives during that time that the Soviets claimed that he was engaging in espionage. Whatever the case may be, Wallenberg was never seen or heard from again, and his ultimate fate remains a historical mystery with no definitive answers. He'll be remembered as one of the greatest rescuers of Jewish people during the Second World War, as is evidenced by the recognition of Yad Vashem, a memorial in Israel for victims of the Holocaust, that declared Wallenberg as righteous among the nations. In a war that claimed the lives of tens of millions of innocent people, Wallenberg will forever stand out as someone who is willing to lay down his life in the pursuit of fair treatment and humanitarianism. Number 4. The continent of Africa is one that contains a seemingly unending amount of historical mysteries. From the origins of humans to the puzzling pyramids of Giza that are located in Egypt, and new mysteries are being uncovered there on a nearly daily basis, as archaeologists keep uncovering clues that teach us about the people who lived on the continent and their cultural practices. But every so often, a mystery emerges to which there is seemingly no answer. One such mystery was uncovered in Sierra Leone when hundreds of enigmatic stone figures, known as the Namoli Figures, were discovered, but there's very little known about them. Even the tale of their discovery isn't a sure thing, as it's merely theorized that the figures were uncovered by people who were looking for diamonds inside of caves, or others who were tending to their fields, but this is only a small part of the mystery that's been unanswered. The figures appear to be an out-of-place artifact, as their age doesn't seem to correspond with history as we know it. It's believed that they're around 19,000 years old, but this is where things get a little strange. When one of the figures was uncovered, it was found to contain a tiny metal ball in a hollow space inside the figure, and when the ball was analyzed, it was found to be made of chrome and steel. And herein lies one of the mysteries. According to our knowledge, the oldest piece of steel that we know is a mere 4,000 years old, meaning that the ball inside the Namoli figure predates that by 15,000 years. This has, of course, given birth to many theories, one of which is that the figures were sculpted by an advanced race that lived on the continent many centuries ago, and that this race had knowledge that would seem godlike at this time. Because of this, many people believe that they were either a race of ancient aliens that visited Earth, or that the people who lived in Sierra Leone at the time were visited by these extraterrestrial beings, who taught the people of the area to create metals such as iron and chromium. Since there are no recorded tales of any civilizations living in this area 19,000 years ago, we're left to wonder what happened to the people that carved these figures. One theory suggests that they were driven towards the coast, but no one has any idea why this would have happened. One would also imagine that a race that's more advanced than any other at the time would have no struggles when it came to survival, and yet there's no record of such a civilization that would suggest that they were either wiped out or slowly dwindled in numbers until they completely vanished off the face of the earth, which seems unlikely if they had superior knowledge. But the fact that a small piece of metal was discovered inside one of the figures brings about another question. Since the metal ball is perfectly spherical, what kinds of tools did these people possess to create such an item, since it should theoretically be impossible? Added to that is the fact that just to create the figures themselves, extraordinarily high melting temperatures would have been necessary, and this should have been theoretically not possible. This then brings us to the next mystery regarding these strange figures, which is their purpose. Since Africa is known for its legends, many theories have been put forward to try and explain what the figures actually represent. One legend tells of giants that roamed the area in the distant past. These giants were said to have glowing eyes and were so bright that it was impossible for a normal human to look at them, since the eyes shone as bright as sunlight. They also had thunderous voices that could be heard for miles around, and they were able to access areas on Earth where no one had ever been before. It's been suggested that the Namoli figures were created as a representation of these massive humans. As for their appearance, it varies greatly from figure to figure. Some seem to represent human forms, such as the previously mentioned giants. Some of the figures have been carved to show only a head, while others are a complete representation of a head and body. But others are more inexplicable, as they depict half-human, half-beast figures. Some have lizard bodies with human heads. Others have human bodies with massive human heads or large bodies with tiny heads that are completely out of proportion. They also vary in color depending on the type of stone that was used in their creation. Those made of soapstone are usually a dull brown color, while others are white or green in appearance, suggesting that they were carved from either a type of soapstone or a talc-like material. But despite the variances in their sizes, shapes, and appearances, there seems to be an agreement that the Namoli figures served a common purpose. But what that purpose was remains an unsolved historical mystery that we may never find answers to. There's also much debate surrounding the age of the figures. An archaeologist named John Atherton and historian Milan Kalous suggested that the figures aren't actually 19,000 years old, but that they date from the 7th century. This is due to the fact that it's impossible to accurately date stone, and so we can only speculate whether they're as ancient as was once believed. There is, of course, always the possibility that the figures were merely decorative, and that they had no actual purpose, other than depicting the culture of the people who lived in the area at the time. And so we're left with more questions than answers. Whether there really were giant humans roaming the African continent centuries ago remains unknown, as does the method that was used to create these strange figures. Were they created by an ancient race of super advanced humans? Or was their creation aided by extraterrestrial beings that visited Earth, bringing unseen knowledge with them? We may find out one day, but for now, we can only speculate. Number 3. Those of us who haven't visited Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain in England have seen photos and videos of the strange monument, and we've speculated for a long time over how the stones were put in place, by who the structures were built, and what its exact purpose may be. But when it comes to size, Stonehenge pales in comparison to one site located in France, known as the Carnac Alignments. Despite its size, the site is every bit as mysterious as Stonehenge, since we have very little information on why it exists. Excavations were undertaken at the site for the first time in the 1870s, when an archaeologist by the name of James Milne decided to document their positions. Some of the stones that had fallen over were re-erected by Milne's apprentice, and thanks to the work they did, the site was eventually considered important enough to be protected by the state. Not only is the site much larger than its British counterpart, but it's also older, since historians believe, thanks to radiocarbon dating, that the stones were created at least 1,000 years before Stonehenge was erected. The smallest of these measures about 1.5 feet in length, while the largest, known as the Giant of Magno, reaches an impressive 19.5 feet high. On average, the stones weigh around 22,000 pounds each, as compared to the megaliths at Stonehenge, which weigh 55,000 pounds on average. Although smaller than those at Stonehenge, the size of some of the stones at Carnac is impressive, but the distance that they cover is even more remarkable as they stretch over a 2-mile area. More than 3,000 of the stones have been found standing along the Brittany coastline, and to this day, it's the largest man-made cluster of standing stones that's ever been discovered. But there's at least one part of the mystery that's been answered. The stones were found to have been quarried on site from bedrock that was relatively easy to reach beneath the Earth's surface. They were then placed upright with the use of ropes and pulleys, but this would have been an impressive show of strength for people living in the area at the time. The stones are divided into several sections, and it's been suggested that these sections were once a long line of stones that's now been broken by modern roads. Adding more mystery to this site is the discovery of the burial chambers that were also created from the stone. Since some of these chambers are even older than the Karnak stones, it isn't known whether they're related to them in any way, or if the people buried there had anything to do with their assembly. The mystery of their construction lies in their arrangement. They seem to have been put in place very carefully, suggesting that their alignment had some significance to the people who built the site. But we're no closer to finding out what that purpose may have been. Some people have suggested that since the stones have been placed on a ridge between the coast and the inland, they merely mark where one area ends and the next begins. But many more outlandish theories have been put forward. One such hypothesis has to do with tiny fairy-like creatures called corrigans that have been spoken about in Brittany for many centuries. They're said to be beautiful female creatures that look whimsical but are in fact deadly to those who come across their path, as they're known to take the lives of men in particular. They've also been rumored to steal human babies and leave their own offspring behind. Even their breath is said to be deadly to humans, and many believe that if you have a bad experience while traveling, it's because you were cursed by one of these creatures before your journey even started. Some people have speculated that the Karnak stones were erected by these tiny creatures, though it isn't known why they would have done so. But the mysticism surrounding this site doesn't end there. Another theory suggests that the stones were actually pagan soldiers that marched across the plains in search of Pope Cornelius, but he saw them coming and turned them to stone where they stood. Another theory, brought about by the straight lines in which the stones were erected, claims that they were a legion of Roman soldiers who were quickly turned to stone after they encountered a wizard known as Merlin. There is, however, one theory that's gained some traction. If a line is drawn to connect two particular stones on the west side, and this line is then extended, it points at Edinburgh in Scotland. The same is true for two particular stones on the east side, but this extended line instead points directly at Stonehenge. The theory is that since both Edinburgh and Stonehenge are connected to the Celts, they may have had some information about our planet that we're no longer aware of. If the two sites are indeed connected, it would suggest that ancient cultures had traveled over far more of the Earth than we previously thought, and that they had the ability to create maps as they did so. But the true purpose of these stones remains a mystery. For all we know, they may just mark a border between two ancient territories, or denote a site that was considered sacred by the people who lived in Brittany long ago. Whether they serve a more meaningful purpose is mere conjecture. After word spread about the mysterious stones, members of the public traveled to the site, and unfortunately, many of the stones were damaged or moved. Hence, it's no longer possible to see the stones except during the winter months. Number 2. Most archaeological discoveries are made by scientists such as archaeologists who excavate a specific site where they believe artifacts may be found. But this isn't always the case, as many significant discoveries have been made by ordinary people who just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And sometimes a historical mystery is found in a place that was right under our noses all along. As is the case with Amero Maru, an alcove located in Lake Titicaca that was discovered quite by accident. It should come as no surprise that Lake Titicaca is the site of an archaeological discovery, as many have been made there before. After divers found various artifacts in the Koa Reef, a team of marine biologists decided to investigate further, and they were not disappointed. They found that the site was littered with artifacts, including gold figurines, ceramic incense burners, gold ornaments, and a medallion, among other treasures. But the lake has yielded many other archaeological sites in the past, with at least 12 of those being discovered on the island of the Sun, which is located on the lake's southern side. But the discovery that we're focusing on was made above the water when a Peruvian tour guide stumbled across a section of rock that immediately caught his eye, since it seemed smoother than the rest of the rocks surrounding it. He decided to take a closer look and was astonished by what he found. A square section of the rock had been carved out, as if someone had started building something out of the mountainside but was interrupted. The square section of rock measured around 23 square feet, and it seemed to have been carved out with precision, as if it had been done with professional tools. But that wasn't the only discovery that he made that day. Carved into the larger section of rock was a smaller, T-shaped alcove that gives the impression of a closed doorway. In the middle of this alcove, he found a small circular hole that seems to serve no purpose, as did the rest of the strange carving. Given its shape, it was named Amero Maru, or the Gate of the Gods, and it's left experts scratching their heads as to who built it and what its exact purpose was. Given that we know very little about the structure, many people have suggested theories as to why it was created, and many myths have spawned since its discovery. It's been suggested that the carving was made by an ancient civilization that lived in the area before the Incas, but again, we have no idea what the supposed doorway would have been used for. Others think that it may be a passage through which one can access the spiritual realm. As is often the case, many people have suggested that there's an extraterrestrial connection to the carving, or that it's some kind of Stargate portal through which interdimensional travel is possible. Tales told by Native American people state that the doorway was used by those who were considered heroes, and after passing through the door, they would come face to face with their gods. They would then become immortal beings who lived beside the gods, only returning to Earth in order to keep an eye on their kingdoms. The Sumerians believed that the door could be used to travel to certain faraway destinations in the blink of an eye. Then there's the tale of an Incan priest called Amero Maru, who served the Temple of the Seven Rays. He was being pursued by Spanish soldiers, but before they could capture him, he produced a disc that fit perfectly into the hole that's carved in the alcove. This caused the door to open, and he was able to escape by hiding in the mountain. He would later show the doorway to his fellow priests, again using the disc, and after he passed through the doorway once more, he walked down a tunnel that's rumored to emit light to this day. But one man is certain of the door's purpose, as he claims to have actually used it on one occasion, though it wasn't the first time that he had visited the site. On one of these trips, Jerry Wills met a shaman called Pedro, who read his fortune using cocoa leaves, and he told Jerry that his marriage was in trouble. He would lose his business, and he would meet a woman with golden hair who would change his life for the better. On the 11th of November, 1998, Jerry was at Amero Maru with his wife, Kathy, when they say they had an extraordinary experience. Jerry was told by Pedro that he'd witnessed people walking through the doorway, never to return. On other occasions, people appeared from the other side only to walk back through again, though he didn't know who these people were or why they were using the doorway. He did, however, know how it was done, and before divulging any information, he made Jerry swear never to tell anyone what he was about to learn. Pedro explained that these people used 3 musical notes to open the doorway, and on one occasion, a musician who was sitting near the door accidentally hummed the 3 correct notes. This caused the doorway to open, and the man was pulled into the mountain. No one ever saw the man again. He also warned Jerry that if he managed to open the door, there was no way of knowing where he would end up or if he would ever be able to come back again. But Jerry decided to go to the site anyway, and as soon as he got there, he hummed 2 of the tones. He says he immediately felt like he was falling from a great height, and he managed to pull himself away from the door with great effort. He returned to the doorway with his wife after deciding that they wanted to see what would happen if they hummed the correct notes. This time, he managed to overcome the feeling of falling after humming all 3 of the notes. He says that the next thing he knew, he was pulled through the doorway, and he was physically falling through space at unimaginable speed. When he stopped falling, he found himself in a massive, completely white room. Shortly after, he heard a man's voice that sounded like it was coming from an intercom speaker. The man asked Jerry who he was and welcomed him, explaining that he was one of the people who had built the doorway. The voice added that the door could be used to travel to certain areas on Earth, but also to other worlds in the cosmos. He went on to explain that the 3 notes are used to resonate silica in the stones, that then interrupts the naturally occurring energy in the rock. This causes a portal, similar to a wormhole, to open, and travelers can then use this wormhole to access seemingly unreachable areas of the universe. Jerry says he lost track of how long he had been there, and told the man that he wanted to go back to his wife. The man obliged, and Jerry was sent hurtling through space once more, accompanied by the sound of rushing air. But then he found himself on the wrong side of the door, which now seemed transparent, and he decided to hum the notes again. The door opened and he passed through unharmed. Kathy would tell him that after arriving at the doorway, she saw him sitting next to the door, and while he hummed the notes, he began to shimmer as if his entire body was vibrating at an impossible rate. In the next moment, he completely disappeared, and she panicked since she was worried that he may never come back. She waited at the doorway for about 3 minutes, after which he returned in the same way that he had left, shimmering back into existence. But most scholars believe that the carving in the rock served a far more believable purpose. It's thought that the site was used as a ceremonial location, or a site to which pilgrimages were made. It's also speculated that it had some kind of astronomical significance to the people who constructed it, but what this purpose may be remains an unsolved mystery. Another theory is that it was indeed constructed by the Incas, but that they abandoned the project for an unknown reason. One other mystery that's baffled experts is the precision of which the carving was done. Since the site is clearly very old, it should theoretically have been impossible for anyone alive at the time to accomplish such a carving, especially on such a large scale. But the true origins and purpose of Amero Maru remain shrouded in mystery for now, and the sad truth is that we may never learn why it exists, since no record of its creation has ever been discovered. There are no plans for the site to be excavated further, since the Peruvian government has declared it an ancient site that needs to be protected. At present, it's still considered by many people as a sacred site, or one that has significant historical value, and thousands of visitors stream to the mountain every year to experience the strange sight for themselves. Number 1. When it comes to historical mysteries, we usually hear of strange artifacts that have been uncovered in unlikely areas, people who mysteriously disappeared without a trace, or unsolved crime cases that have baffled investigators for decades. But one historical tale skews away from the norm, as it contains elements of the supernatural that would drive one family to near insanity. It all began in 1661 in Wiltshire, England. The people of a village called Tedworth, now known as Tidworth, were aware of a homeless man that stayed in the area, but they avoided him at all costs, since they were convinced that he was evil and he had close connections with Satan. The man also had no love for the people of the village, as he was known to curse at them as they walked by, and on a few occasions had spit on anyone who ventured close enough to him. One night, the man took to a street corner and started banging on a drum, annoying everyone within earshot. But no one dared to confront the man, and they decided to leave him be, as they were sure he would eventually get tired and leave the area. But this didn't happen, and the man kept banging on the drum for days and nights on end. This continued until one man, John Mumpison, lost his patience and contacted the police, who immediately arrested the man for causing a public disturbance. He was thrown into prison without his drum, since John had decided to keep it for himself, an idea that he would later regret. John and his family soon forgot about the entire incident, as they carried on with their everyday lives, and on one occasion he left the village to travel to London, where he was to attend an important business meeting. But unbeknownst to John, things had taken a turn for the worse back home. Inexplicable events had started happening in the house, causing his family and staff to live in terror. And as soon as he heard what was going on, he rushed home, cutting his business meeting short. Upon his arrival, his wife told him that they'd been hearing an impossibly loud drumming noise that resonated throughout the house, but search as they might, they were unable to find where it was coming from. They described the sound as coming from nowhere and everywhere at the same time, an idea that John didn't intend to entertain since he was convinced that there had to be a reasonable explanation for what they had heard. But he too was unable to find the source of the drumming, and for the next 2 years, the family was forced to live with the constant noise, causing tempers to flare at times and the members of the household to constantly be terrified. Soon, the drumming was accompanied by other inexplicable events. John's servants reported that they had seen candlesticks, cutlery, and plates floating in the air before their very eyes, and they became convinced that an evil spirit had possessed the house. Added to this were reports of disembodied footsteps that rang out in the dead of night, and phantom breathing in their bedrooms. As if this weren't terrifying enough, Visitors to John's house stated that they saw his children floating in the air as if they'd been picked up by some unseen spirit and dangled in midair. Eventually, it all became too much for the family, and they decided to look for a way to end their misery. But he would find answers from a very unlikely source, namely the homeless drummer that he had arrested. After spending 2 years in jail, the man asked to see John at the prison, and when he arrived, he immediately noticed that the man was looking at him with a sinister expression on his face. He told John that he knew exactly what was going on at his house, leaving John astonished and confused as to how he could possibly have such information. Becoming irate with the strange man, John insisted that he tell him what was going on, though I imagine later he wished he hadn't. The man told him he was actually a witch and that he was the cause of the strange activity in the family's home. John was reluctant to believe him since he was skeptical of all things supernatural, but he continued to listen. The man asked whether he wanted the drumming and other creepy activity to stop, and of course, John said that he did. The drifter then went on to explain that he could bring peace back to the house quite easily. All John had to do was have him released from prison and return his drum to him. If this was done, it would be as if nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened in the house, and the family would be free to continue their lives as they wished. John didn't know whether he should take the man seriously, since he was taking a massive chance by confessing that he was a witch, a revelation that, at the time, could very easily have resulted in him being brought to justice via execution. But John decided that the entire story was too outlandish to believe, and he refused to comply. The homeless man was transferred to the North American colonies to ensure that he would never bother them again. When he returned home, John decided to erase the memory of the drifter from his family's minds, and he set the drum on fire. As soon as this was done, the drumming in the house ceased, as did all other paranormal activity that they'd been experiencing. They never heard from the drifter again, and they did just as the man had predicted, living their lives as normal from then on. Many people believe that the tale of the demon drummer from Tedworth to be just that, a made-up story that never happened. But since many records exist that tell the same tale, there are many more people who believe these events to be true, and that John really did have a strange encounter with a witch. Others think that John suffered a bout of guilt over having the man imprisoned and stealing his drum, and they believe that this guilt manifested itself in the events that were reported by his family. The drifter's identity remains a mystery, and we can only speculate where he eventually ended up. That is, if this historical mystery is, in fact, true. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.